Hello. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. First of all, I would like to thank TDRA actually for giving us this opportunity today to work with the group. We've got a good group, I think over 30 people, and I'm looking forward to the session. So thanks very much, TDRA, for this. So we can get started. And today's session is about recognizing triggers through emotions. Now, what do we mean by that? Recognizing triggers through emotions. We all work with emotions, or certainly we experience emotions. Do we really understand what triggers our actions as a result of these emotions? So the objective of today is really to try and get a mechanism for understanding what are the triggers that cause us to behave in the way that we do. And certainly much of that is dependent upon our emotions. So that's the session. What? We can't hear. We can't hear. Cannot hear. Just a second. Okay. Hello? 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 Can you hear me now? We had a sound problem there a minute ago. Can you hear me? Is everyone able to hear? There is no mute on. Let's try. Yes, thank you. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, well, I'll start again because I think we had a sound problem before. So welcome to today's session. And as I said before, I'd really like to thank TDRA for this opportunity that they've given us today to work with you all. It's quite a large group, over 30 people, and I'm looking forward to this. So thank you, TDRA. So today's session is all about recognizing triggers through emotions. So what exactly do we mean by recognizing triggers through emotions? We work with emotions, or we experience emotions. The question is, do we actually always understand what these emotions are? And do we realize that we're working on emotions? And so the objective of today is to try our best to recognize what triggers our emotions and how we then behave according to those emotions. So that's why it's called recognizing these triggers, so that we can actually harness our emotions to get a better response. So my name is John Bentley. I work with two large organizations, neuroscience, emotional intelligence networks in the world. And the first one is 6 Seconds. They're global organizations, the largest emotional intelligence network in the world. And the second one is the Neuro Leadership Institute, also based on EQ, or emotional intelligence, but more focused on coaching. So with 6 Seconds, I use various tools, practitioner and assessor, to work with executives and in my coaching practice, or when we're actually practicing coaching. And the Vital Signs is more business-led, with drivers that are based on emotion, but actually we don't talk about that. It's more business-led, and for teams and for organizations and for individuals. With the Neuro Leadership Institute, this is all about brain-based coaching. So that's me. And all of these are ICF accredited, of course. They have to be. Now, I want you to look at this. Just watch this video carefully. Well, I don't know if you could hear that at all, but what this gentleman experienced there was sheer frustration because he got the blue screen. Something happened, he pressed the buttons and he got the blue screen. Maybe you could see that. But actually, because he got the blue screen, he couldn't proceed with what he was trying to do. And he got so frustrated, as you could see, he started to smash his computer to pieces and then ended up throwing it out the window. Now, I hope none of us have had an experience to that extent, but we all have had very, very frustrating experiences in the past. So I think you can get a glimpse of the frustration that exists. And now we've all been like this as well, haven't we? Where on earth do I start with this? I'm not sure how I can continue with this. I've got such a workload. Look at the time scale. I'm never going to get it through for my boss in time. And for this one, I am just so tired. I just don't know where to start. All of this is something that we've probably all experienced. I hope not quite as severe, but it all comes down to stress. Stress. So what exactly is stress? But also a question for you. How often are you aware of your stress? We have it and we need it. We need to a degree, we need a certain amount of stress. But when it gets like the frustration that that gentleman had when he threw his computer out, he was not thinking of the consequences of what he was doing. How often do you stop and think about your own stress? Would anybody like to just give me a response, please? Just to let me know how do you actually stop and think about your stress? Can you drop it in the chat? Often, not very often. You just go through it. Let me know. How often are you aware of the stress that you're experiencing? Let me know. Anybody? Get some replies? Okay. So my conjecture on this is that sometimes we may stop and be aware of the stress that we're experiencing, but a lot of the time, most of the time, we just don't even recognize the signs, and we don't actually realize what is causing us the stress and why we feel that way. So how can we best deal with this? That's the question. How can we do this? How can we become more aware of the stress? And how often, or should we stop and think? That's what today's session is really about. So, after posing that kind of question, let's have a look at what the backdrop is to our stress. Has anybody heard of VUCA? Anybody know what VUCA is? Because we're living in a VUCA world. Can anybody want to give me any indication of what they think VUCA is? Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. Okay. VUCA is an environment that we've been living with and living in for the last probably 5 to 8 years at least. This is what it is. It's actually a volatile world, a very uncertain world, a world of complexity and also ambiguity. And we've got to put up with this. This is what we've been living in because of change. Rapid change brought about by all manner of circumstances, technology being one of them, of course, but it's not the only one. But it's having to be in a competitive environment and being ahead of our competitors, being ahead of the market, and it's causing a lot of this VUCA environment to flourish. So we've been in this now for the last, as I say, somewhere around 8 years. And we need to know how to handle this. So have a look at this video, and I hope that you can hear it. So I hope that gave you some a glimpse of what the VUCA world is all about. And just to remind you, that's the fact that we live in a volatile world. It's very uncertain. It consists of complexity, and we don't quite know sometimes what the communication is that we're supposed to be dealing with. It's ambiguous. So how can we deal with this? It's all about creating a vision. This is for you. Anybody can do this. It's about drive. It's about energy and maintaining that motivation through vision. It's about being clear with your communications and also being accountable. That helps to create clarity. And of course, collaboration, we'll have a look at that in a minute, but collaboration comprises empathy and of course inclusion, and that's suffering. We'll have a look at that in a bit more detail, but we need to be able to collaborate in this VUCA world, and we need to constantly innovate and constantly change because things are changing rapidly, and we have to have this infinite mindset, not be afraid of change. So that's living in a VUCA world. But ladies and gentlemen, of course, what has happened in the process is that stress has increased 20% in the last 25 years. 6 Seconds do research projects very regularly all over the world, and this is what they have come up with, the fact that stress has increased 20% in 25 years. And what is the knock-on effect of that? If you can see this, a 20% increase in stress has actually caused empathy to decline by 75% in the world. So this is really about stress. So we know that stress affects our health. We know that. But stress has a major impact on our performance, because as stress increases, we become very much more focused in the moment. And that's more task and reactive behavior. We don't respond in the way that maybe we should be doing. We react, and we become much more task focused. This in turn increases our isolation. We withdraw, which in turn increases our stress. So we've got to try and break this cycle somehow. So stress, as we said, is increasing and empathy is decreasing. What's it doing to collaboration? Well, the fact is that we need empathy to collaborate. We need to be able to connect. So collaboration has also reduced 25%, which is really interesting. It's a different study that's come about, but collaboration in the world has also decreased as a result. So that was what was going on in VUCA, but of course then COVID came along. Now what has happened since then? We all know. Since 2020, our stress levels are increasing exponentially, even more so. And what has become the new normal, as we used to call it, is now the normal. And what has happened, in fact, is that there's been an abrupt halt to life as usual, as we knew it. There's much more focus on having of belonging to a group, this collective self-identity because of remote working. And of course, because of that, uncertainty has increased even further. And there's a high degree, a lack of control, a feeling of lack of control because of this. Many projects have been undertaken And this is the result. Now, this invokes our primeval fight, flight, and freeze reactions. So typically what happens, certainly in the pandemic, those that accept the situation and are prepared to get on with it and fight it, essentially, are more optimistic. Those that reject this and fly, they experience flight, they deny it. And this is basically through fear. And others have just given up. That's total pessimism. So where are you on this scale? This is the point. Where are you on the scale? Now, I'm going to ask you, as we've got to the midpoint in 2021, hopefully things are getting better, but exactly how are your stress levels? I'm going to ask you now to get a pen and paper and be prepared, please, to write down some answers, very simple, to the following questions. I'm not interested to know who answered what, not at all. This is going to be aggregated so that we just get an overall view. And I'll show you where you are on the stress meter, just this simple stress test. So let's begin then. Get ready with your pens and your paper. And here are the questions. There's 25 questions. So please write down number 1 and then tick it if it's a yes, cross if it's a no. Do you neglect your diet? Number 2, try to do everything yourself. Do you do that? Or yes or no? Just tick or cross. Do you get cross very easily, angry, blow up? Number 4, do you seek unrealistic goals? You're not quite sure. So go down this list and just ask yourselves these questions and tick yes or no according to the questions. And then we'll have a quick poll at the end just to see how you've done. So just a minute to do this, if you would. I'll leave you to it. 25 questions, just yes or no. Once you've done this, what I'd like you to do is add up the number of yes ticks that you've got, the number of times you've answered yes. Just add them up. And if you can get ready, I'll have this up for just another 30 seconds or so. And then we're going to do a little poll. And I'd like you to answer the question in a minute on the chat line. As I say, this is not going to be broadcast in any way. This is just purely and simply to count up the number of yeses and to see where you are for yourself on this very simple stress test. Okay. So I hope that everybody has managed to get to the 25. If not, please, if you can just let us know if you need more time, and we'll give you a little bit more time. I'll come back to the questionnaire. Okay, so the poll. I would like you to just answer, give an answer through the chat. Did you get between 0 and 5? Did you get between 6 and 10? 11 and 15, 16 and 20, 21 and 25. How many yeses did you get? Between 0 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 and 15, 16 and 20, and 21 to 25. Then I'm going to let you see where you fit on the stress meter. So if you can let us know, just put it in the chat line, and then hopefully you will get a feel actually for where you sit in the stress meter. Okay. Right. I think we have probably given you enough time to do that. Right, here we go. We've got some answers. Okay. So we've got between 0 and 5 people, 14 between 0 and 5, 11 between 6 and 10, 19 between 11 and 15. Sorry, somebody wants to go back. That's perfectly fine. No problem. Okay. And Imogen is going to give me the results in percentages in a minute as a result of the poll. But I'll just let you have a quick look at the questionnaire again. Some people wanted to go back for just a few minutes. So, sorry, a few seconds. I'll do that. Okay. I think, are we okay with that? Okay. Now, can you answer the question again? Just let me know and see if the poll changes at all. So what have we got? Okay, so we have got, I think, is there any 21? Okay, so interestingly, let's just go back to the poll. We actually have 17 people between 21 and 25. We've got, I think, we've got going from 0 to 5, it's 14, then 11, then 19 between 11 and 15, and 11 between 16 and 20. I think, I'm not sure how this is, I think this is working out. But anyway, what we'll now look at, think about your score and see where you fit on this scale. If you've got 0 to 5, then actually you're quite fortunate. You've got fairly few hassles and fairly few stresses in your life. If you are 6 to 10, that's fairly good control, quite good. If you've got between 11 and 15, however, then realistically you're approaching the danger zone, so you have to be careful. And if you have 16 to 25, then there is an emergency. You really have to stop, reflect, and focus on stress management. I would argue that you need to do that if you're in the orange zone as well, 11 to 15. So just make a note of that, folks. Where are you? And there's no stigma with this. We've all experienced stress, and we all do experience stress. It's how we handle it that is important. So, but if this is you constantly, then this gives a fairly good indication of where you are on this stress meter. And certainly orange and red is not really where you want to be. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate that. Now, what is stress? What is chaining us to stress, essentially? Because we are chained to it. And it all stems from something in the brain called the amygdala, or the amygdala, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This is really the center of our emotions. This is actually also where fear lurks. And it really is it's a part of our prehistoric brain, as opposed to here in the front, which is our prefrontal cortex. We've been blessed with this for the last several thousand years as human beings. It gives us imagination. It gives us the ability to reason. The amygdala, however, is a trigger mechanism. And that trigger mechanism reacts a lot of the time to fear, which drives us a lot of the time. It's so strong that when we are trying to figure out something logically, if we're reacting to our emotions, the amygdala takes over. It prevents our rational thought. It hijacks our thought. And we go straight to the amygdala, where we then start to invoke our emotions. And this is where stress comes from. If we can try our best not to ignore these emotions, not at all, we'll see this, to try and use them effectively, but really to use them and then bring it back into this prefrontal cortex to allow us to do some reasoning, some rational thinking, so that we can behave in a different way, rather than the way that we typically react in a stressful situation. So that's what happens in a very short description of the way our emotions work and the way the amygdala hijacks our rational thought. It's there for survival, by the way, fight, flight, or freeze, but that's what it's there for, and it's fundamentally important to us. But we don't actually necessarily fear wild animals or being killed for our food here in where we lived in our society today, unless you're in a difficult part of the world. Now it's social fear. It's social fear that drives us to stress almost every time. Fear of not being liked, fear of rejection, fear of losing our job, fear of not being able to have our salaries, all that kind of stuff. So that's essentially what it is, but it's more than that, because stress can be controlled. It can be controlled. Stress is actually a physiological thing. It's a physiological as well as a psychological response. So some event alarms us, and that triggers a physiological and a psychological response. We either fight, fly, or we experience some psychological experience. So what I'm saying, unlike, for instance, if you are you get goosebumps, if you're cold, we can't easily control that too well. Stress is not quite like that. Stress is not something that happens to us automatically like that. It is how we react to what happens. That's the important thing. Do we react or do we try to respond with intention? It's all about this amygdala hijack. So we can control it if we know how to. And that's what we're going to talk about, because we need to somehow have a mechanism for being better control in this emotional chaos of both the VUCA and our COVID world. So try not to panic. We want to learn to use our emotional intelligence in all of this. That's what we're trying to do. Remember, stress is a reaction to what happens to us, and we can control that. So what exactly is emotional intelligence? I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but what is it? What is emotional intelligence? Does anybody want to just put something in the chat to tell me very simply what you think emotional intelligence is? Anybody? Just put it in the chat. So emotional intelligence is known as EI, and it's also known as EQ, and there's another one of EC, but mostly it's EI and EQ. So this is what it is. IQ is all about knowing how to do something. You learn over the course of your entire life, or when you're learning anything, say even technical like maths or whatever, you know how to do this. This is governed by your IQ. Your EQ, however, is about knowing yourself. And even Harvard say in every MBA that they have a big component of emotional intelligence. Until and unless you understand and know yourself, you will never really fulfill your full potential as a leader. And a leader is anybody who has to persuade somebody or really influence somebody to do something. Don't even need to have a team for that, but that's a leader. The difference between IQ and EQ then is that IQ, we're born with that, and most of the psychologists, neuroscientists agree that actually IQ is fixed. When you get to maybe 12, 15, it's fixed. You use that then to give you the springboard to do whatever you're going to do in your future life. Whereas EQ, you can change EQ. EQ, you keep learning. You can change it if you want to. You can change your behavior. You can change how well you know yourself. So IQ is probably, may surprise you, it's rated at somewhere between 6 and 10% as a predictor of success in the future. Whereas EQ, on the other hand, is rated at in excess of 55% as a predictor of success. So IQ gives you all the basis for whatever you're going to do. EQ helps you then to move forward in every way in the future. It's how you deal with people, how you deal with relationships. So that's what IQ and EQ is. And the simplest definition, the simplest 6 seconds definition is this one. We need to be smarter with our feelings. That's it. That's the simplest way. We need to understand those feelings though first, so that we can then learn how to be smarter about dealing with them. That's what emotional intelligence is, being smarter about feelings. It's the shortest definition there is. So this has an impact on all these areas: career, sports, your own credibility, and of course, interpersonal skills. It's a massive effect, as I say, in excess of 55% in terms of success. So based on 6 seconds research, why does this matter? Because what we know is this, that 80 to 85% of decisions are actually based on emotion. This sounds strange maybe, but believe me, 80 to 85% of decisions are truly based on our emotions. So why this matters is because emotions are driving us. We're running on emotions. So if emotions drive people, then people are driving business and people are driving performance. And so it matters. If we can understand how we're using our emotions better, it gives us a better opportunity to make better decisions, and therefore better business decisions, and therefore improve performance. That's why EQ is now so important, ladies and gentlemen. IQ, of course, it's important. It's fundamental. We dip in and out of that all the time, every minute. And you can't be a doctor unless you've learnt how to be one with using your IQ. But the reality is, another study, 87.5% of a doctor's success comes from how they deal with people. 12.5% is based on their IQ and all the training and stuff that they've done. So that's just an example. Same thing can be said for accountants, same thing for lawyers, etc., etc. So it's fundamentally important. So I'm going to now talk about 5 golden rules that you can possibly try and harness to manage your emotions. Actually, these main emotions that help us to manage stress. So here's the first one. Rule number 1. Stop. Pause, pause, pause. You're feeling a bit stressed. Take a breath and pause. Stop. It's absolutely fundamental. This is one of the most fundamental of the EQ competencies to leverage. Stop yourself and actually take what we call the 6-second pause. Why is it 6 seconds? And why do 6 seconds call themselves 6 seconds? I'm going to explain that. Because it takes between 4 and 8 seconds for an emotion to register somewhere in the body. So the average is 6. Now, you've all heard, and probably your parents and wise people and others and teachers say, look, count to 10 before you take an action. Very wise. We didn't always understand the full science behind that. But now if you take the 6-second pause, we've got I've got a question here, how to separate emotions from rational. The question for that is you actually have to understand these emotions before you can actually start to separate them. And please, the fundamental answer to this is do not suppress the emotions, do not ignore the emotions, because, ladies and gentlemen, the best decisions we have to make in life involve emotions. This notion that we should put emotions out of our decision making, yes, to an extent, there's an element of truth there, but it's not possible. It is not possible because emotions are part of us. We cannot leave them at the door. We can't hang them up in a cupboard before we go to work. It doesn't work that way. What we have to do is, first and foremost, the first step to that question, how we separate emotions from rational, is to understand the emotions that we're feeling. So now that's what we're going to do, actually. So thank you for that question. It's a great question. So stop, and essentially take time to reflect, to reframe your thoughts, or at least to give yourself some thinking time. And you'll see in that picture, maybe that video where unfortunately there wasn't much sound, but a guy, he was hammering away on his computer. He did push himself back on the chair. That was giving himself some time to think. He did that, but unfortunately he did not follow the next few steps. He went back to that impulse was so great, that emotion was so great, he went to hammering his keyboard and threw it out the window in the end. So take time to reflect. We want to try and respond rather than react. A lot of the time we're working on autopilot, and we'll cover that very shortly. That's what we're trying to do. Exactly right. We're trying to get our emotions under control. We have to understand them first and then start reasoning. How do we do this? This is this 6-second pause. We also know that when emotions register in our body in, say, 6 seconds, they also subside in 6 seconds. So 6 seconds is right. Emotions are chemical signals in the body, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. Every single emotion is unique. And so what happens is that if you give yourself 6 seconds, the emotion or emotions you're feeling tend to subside in that time, unless of course you get another impulse and then something else drives it again. But if we can break that cycle of gathering emotions, of a cascade of emotions, by stopping, taking the 6-second pause, we're on the way to being able to understand and deal with our emotions. So that's the first step. The next rule is this one. We've got to try and analyze our emotion or the emotions we are feeling in this stressful moment. This is not easy, ladies and gentlemen. I don't pretend to say it is. It's like going to the gym. We've got to try and exercise frequently, and the more we do it, the better we become. So how do we do this? We analyze what it is that we're feeling, either 1, 2, 3, however many emotions. So we've stopped. Now, think about these emotions. What am I feeling? And what possibly are the feelings of those around me? If you are good at understanding your own emotions, you're better at picking up those feelings and emotions of those people around you. That is the signs. You can pick up signs. If you're not as good at picking up your own emotions, then the likelihood is you probably won't see the signs as well as somebody who can recognize their own emotions better. Now, there's no good and bad in all of this. It's what we are. And when we do coaching, we help people to, if you're not very good with this, we help people to improve understanding their emotions. So how aware are you of your own emotions and the others and the other people? Let's start with yourselves. We're going to do another little exercise now, ladies and gentlemen. Pens and paper out. And I want you to think about this very carefully. I'm going to ask you to write down as many emotions as you can. You can write them down in any language. It doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter. As many as you can think of, but there's just one thing. You've got 1 minute to do it. Are you ready? 1 minute. And that 1 minute starts now. Yeah, close. Sorry. Yep. Every time I play a video, I have to disconnect the sound. So sorry about that. Right. There's no good and bad about any of this, by the way. I'm not asking you to know what emotions you've written down at all. What I want you to do is just count the number of emotions that you were able to write down. Was it between 1 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 and 15, and put them in the poll. Just answer in the chat screen. It's just a collection. And there is always a pattern to this. So we're quite used to it. Let's see if you get, if you are familiar, if you fall into the same kind of pattern. Let's see. So just write down how many did you, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and that in the poll, just in the chat line, and let's see how many you got. Okay, I think we've got yes, you're saying that between 1 and 5 is 4. I think, I'm not sure. Is that right? And between 6 and 10 is 8. Any more? There's a large group out there. Ah, okay. So we've got 11 to 15. Okay, we're going to, yes. So we will actually get the percentages of this later at the end. So look, thanks for doing that. This is an exercise to see how well you can tap into your emotions. So those who maybe only got 1 to 5 emotions, doesn't mean to say that's all you've got. Not at all. This is a reflection. Remember, I gave you 1 minute. And then eventually when I got the music playing, it was driving you. That music was quite vibrant. So there was a little bit of pressure there. And you had the stress of 1 minute to do these emotions. That is when we need to practice our emotional intelligence most, when we're under stress. Not easy. I totally agree with you. But actually, the more you think about this and the more you practice it, the better it becomes in the moment. If you don't do it in the moment, you have to do it afterwards, analyze it, and you'll see why that might work better in the next step. So thank you for that. And so that was actually all about your emotional literacy, how much you actually are able to name your emotions, because the psychologists tell us if you can name an emotion, you can actually tame it. So now you've stopped, and now you're thinking, okay, how am I feeling? If you can put a name to those emotions, then remember the 6 seconds, that emotion starts to ebb away. That was what we mean by taming it. Use these emotions as a strategic resource. It's not to be suppressed. Right. Rule number 3. This is about recognizing patterns of behavior in yourself and when you get good and in others as well. So what does this actually mean? You know, okay, you go into a meeting, I've done this, this always happens, or I always say this, or if I say this to somebody else, they always say this. This is very much about something that when you are talking to people, whatever the attitude you've got, it's about recognizing patterns in yourself. So your attitude actually affects your own behavior. Your behavior affects somebody else's attitude, the person you're dealing with or the people you're dealing with. Their attitude then affects their behavior, and then their behavior goes around and affects your attitude again. We have to break this cycle if it's escalating. We have to do this quite quickly. And we've got to understand what the pattern is in order to do that. So watch this video from Josh. He is the CEO of 6 Seconds. He explains a little bit more about recognizing patterns. So just watch this.
I would hypothesize that 95% of the day, all of us are just on autopilot. We get up in the morning, we start doing our things and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden it's 9:30 and we're in the office and, the phone rings and we're just kind of going through these steps without a lot of mindfulness. And that's very efficient. The problem with it is when we are on autopilot, we're not being careful. When we're in a similar situation, maybe the same situation, we're driving down the same road, it's very, very efficient for us to not pay a lot of attention to that. We're able to think about something else and do something else and respond very quickly. The issue is that when we're in times of change, when we're in a new role, we're in a new situation, when things are complex, we've got to be able to get off of this autopilot. What's happening is we're following these patterns, and they're formed at a neurological level. Our brains like to form patterns. We start associating certain neural networks, and this idea and this idea and this response become connected. And we actually begin to dedicate more and more neurons to that pattern. This step of recognizing your patterns is about seeing what are your own typical reactions and being able to focus in, when this stimulus, what is my typical response? And that stimulus response, it could be when I see this or when I think this. When I think somebody is not being honest with me, typical response. When I feel, typical response. So for me, for example, when I feel guilty, my typical response is to attack. And what happens is that allows me to push the guilt away a little bit. One of my patterns is when I feel overwhelmed, I withdraw. And that gives me some benefits. It lets me kind of recover my energy and not cope with this thing that's overwhelming. On the other hand, it causes me to be conflict avoidant, and it causes me to not address the issue that's making me overwhelmed. So every pattern has costs and benefits. Essentially, though, the first step here is seeing that we have these typical ways of responding and noticing in ourselves when stimulus, typical response, and beginning to develop this inventory of our own typical responses. And that allows us to notice when we're on autopilot and when we're being intentional.
Okay, folks, sorry, I hope you could get the sound there eventually. So what Josh Friedman, who is the CEO of 6 Seconds, was saying there was that recognize the patterns that we build up in our brain are extremely efficient, because that's helping us to go on autopilot. We don't have to think about it all the time. That's efficient, unless, of course, the behavior that we're exhibiting is not really what we want to. That's when we've got to change that pattern. We've got to try and break it. And the only way you can break a habit or change a habit is to develop a new one. The old neural networks are still in there. So how do we do this? We train ourselves. So what he was saying, what is the situation? What exactly was I thinking? Now I'm in this stressful situation. I've stopped. What am I feeling? Okay, here. So you're putting some emotional content to that. What is it? And what are my actions? Now, these are actually autopilot. This is a reaction rather than, if you do not do this, you react on autopilot. So if you can stop yourself and actually identify what you're feeling and what kind of pattern, when this happens, I typically respond in this way. Or when I say this, they respond in this particular way. That is our ability to recognize patterns. Some people are good at it. Some people are not so good at it. But it is a fundamental aspect, component, and competency in EQ of decision making. And we can actually measure this. So once you do this, you go into a meeting, you identify this is what's happened. Or I behaved in this way again. Let me think about what did I do? What was I feeling? What action? Okay, these are the triggers. We need to then try and try and recognize this, so that the next time you go into this situation, this actually becomes your mental model and you're prepared for it. You're better prepared for it. You go into the meeting and guess what? You do the same thing. Oh dear. So analyze it afterwards. You go in and you do the same thing. You go into a meeting next time, maybe a little bit more prepared for it. Psychologists tell us if you do this kind of thing 3-4 times, it starts to go in and you start to change that pattern. And that actually becomes your mental model. So the whole aspect of this is the focus, recognizing the triggers that cause our stress. When this happens, I do this. And let's analyze that, and you stop, you work out what your feelings are, and now these are the this is the typical pattern. So recognizing patterns is fundamental. So now rule number 4, but I think I've got a question. I have a question here. Let me just see what that is. If I get defensive when I am guilty, what does that mean? That means that you're actually, the amygdala is taking over. You're a great question, because defensive behavior tends to relate to fear. And so I can't answer this, or something's happened. So this is where stop. This is a great question. I'm stop myself. This is a typical recognizing patterns behavior. It's defensive. When I'm guilty, I get defensive. So what can I do about this? So what do I feel when this is happening? This allows those emotions to start ebbing away. Fine. Recognize it, name it, tame it. Now, this is a pattern. So what can I do about it? This is rule number 4. What are my options? What do I really want to get out of this? Josh said costs and benefits. That's what this is. And what is the solution? So now we're talking really and truthfully about options. Look at this. We've got choices. And this is actually about exercising your optimism. And optimism is our ability to see a solution, to see beyond now, to find a solution. Or do we just give up? So let's have a look at optimism. I have a video, but I'm going to skip this because I think we're running short of time now. But I'll explain it, because what this does is divides it into, Josh Friedman there talks about optimism being in like three aspects to it, 3 bridges to cross. So we do this in the form of a little model. And if you can try and remember this, you've got a situation which it looks bad. So how do I analyze this? This is the 3 P's versus TIE, tie. What does it mean? Time, isolation, and effort. Time, isolation, and effort. The first one, is this a permanent situation or is it a temporary situation? Ask yourself the question. Is this pervasive? Is this going to ruin my life? Is the sky falling down forever? Is this going to kill me? Or is this an isolated situation? Am I powerless to do anything about it? Or in fact, is it just that effort is required? Effort is possible. So we need to categorize a situation that we're in. We're looking for a solution. It seems bad. Ask yourself the question, is it permanent? Let's take the pandemic. Yes, it is permanent at the moment, but actually it's not, because in history we've had many, many pandemics. So it is temporary. Is it going to ruin our lives? Well, it could. It could if you're not careful. But now we've got isolated, right? So we isolate ourselves in this case. By carefully following the rules, we can isolate it. So that's what we mean. Are we powerless? No, we follow the rules with a bit of effort, and with a bit of effort of our scientists in finding vaccinations, we come up with a solution. So that's where, remember that scale that we had, either optimistic or pessimistic, or indeed fear. So that's how we try to look at optimism. And it's how we view this situation. A pessimist will regard it as permanent, an optimist is temporary. If they're going to ruin our entire life, if it's taking over everything, it's it's pessimism. If it's we regard it as we'll get over this, it's just a time issue. Are we powerless? No, we need effort. And that's the optimism in us that drives us. We're all pessimists and we're all optimists at certain times. We need to be for survival, but it's where we are most of the time. And how can we get ourselves out of this situation? So we've stopped, we've thought of our feelings, we've recognized the patterns, and let's see if we can see a solution forward. What can I do that's different to this pattern of behavior that I always exhibit? Okay, what do I want to get out of it? Now we come to the last rule, which is really reframing and taking a different perspective. And this rule is all about navigating emotions, navigating those emotions. In other words, we're not answering the question that somebody raised some while ago, separating emotions from reason. We're not ignoring them. We're understanding them in order then to bring us back to some kind of reasoning mechanism in the prefrontal cortex. And we navigate the emotion that we did have to get a better result. Navigate around that anger, navigate around that fear, whatever it happens to be. This is navigating emotions. And that's rule number 5. Take a proactive step to reframe. So let's just summarize and we'll see how this works. So pulling it all together, stop, allow yourself time to think. This is a situation, you're a stressful situation, not easy to do in the moment, even if you have to do this afterwards, but in the moment, you get better at it. Stop. Take the 6-second pause or count to 10, whatever you prefer. Now, what is it that I'm feeling? You need to put a name to those emotions that you're feeling, or that emotion, that strong emotion, if you can. That helps us to deflect away, and to answer that wonderful question, starts to bring us back into a rational way of thinking. We're not ignoring the emotion, we're naming it, we're understanding it. The emotions start to ebb away. Then, how do we act? What is the result of this? So, yes, when I feel this way, this is what I always do. When this happens, I do that. That is the pattern. If we recognize that, we can do that. What is the solution? Is there a better way I can do this? Now, obviously, if you've thought about this before in a similar situation, you may have thought of a different way out. If not, in the moment, try and think of some different way to get out of whatever it is, or play for time. Yeah, go back to the 6-second pause. Maybe it becomes 6 days. Doesn't matter. And then finally, we want to develop this, after we've done all this, a new mindset so that we can actually change those patterns and so that we get the optimum result that we want, which is ultimately not to react to stress as much as we normally do, but really we want to try and respond to it, which means understanding all these components. Then we're better off being able to navigate those emotions, and so being able to cope better with stress. Stress is an entirely emotional thing. Yes, it's physiological as well. If a tree is falling on you, you jump out the way. But equally, a lot of it is emotions, 80 to 85% of the time. So it's about thinking, about feeling, and about acting. And so just remember that. Think, feel, and act. That's the simplest model in this. What was I thinking? What was I feeling? And recognizing those patterns and so on. This is how I was acting. Let me see what I can do with what kind of solution can I find and navigate around it. So think, feel, act is your little model. So in this so-called new normal, that's the best we can do in this 1 hour to try our best to try and keep calm in our new normal environment. So that does actually conclude the session. We're exactly 12 o'clock. And so what I would like to know is, has anybody got any questions? Any questions whatsoever about any of those? We had 2-3 great questions, actually. Certainly, it's a very typical one about being defensive when you're guilty. Well, that's the trigger. What is the trigger? That's what you've got to do. And then figure out a different way. Practice it. If you do the same thing, analyze it again, practice it, analyze it again, practice it, and then eventually this starts to become a mental model, and you will start to develop a new way of dealing with it. Anybody got any questions whatsoever? Anybody? Imogen, do you have any questions coming through? I know you were collecting some from people. Yes. That's a good question. How much do we depend on emotions in our decision making? Anybody remember that? It's absolutely fundamental. We depend 80 to 85% of the time on our emotions for decision making. That's a fact. That's what actually happens. And by the way, folks, if that didn't happen, if we didn't bring in emotions to our decision-making process, why are we needed? We're not needed in this day of AI. A computer can make those decisions, but a computer does not have the emotions that we have to make the best decisions. That's why we are still needed, providing we have a better mechanism understanding our emotions. Name them, you can tame them, you can work with them. Don't suppress them. Thanks, yes. Anybody else got any questions? Nope. Okay. Well, if I don't know, I think we're out of time. I'm not sure. So if we know, no, I've got another question. If we know that we get triggered whenever we meet someone, how can we deal with that person? Fine. We're getting there. We're getting there, because once you know that you're triggered, that's excellent. That's a recognition of a pattern. You don't quite know at this stage what that pattern is. Okay, so I know I'm going to be triggered by that person. So let me think. What is it typically that person does, says, or the way that person behaves that gets me triggered? What is it? So you'll get that. That's from Hara, I think, this question. Great question. So now I understand, right? This is typically what happens when this person says or does this. This is how I react. So that's the first thing, the trigger point. What is it? Then how do I typically react? Think about it. Analyze it afterwards. What do I feel? What does that question or that behavior make me feel? Angry? Intimidated? Fearful? What is it? You analyze that. How better can I deal with that? Now you're recognizing the pattern. Now you're looking at a way out. What else could I do? Remember, what is it that I want to achieve from this person? What is it? Now, you do actually have to invoke empathy as well in there somehow by listening to this person. But nevertheless, what is it in terms of a solution? What can I do next? So that's how you try to deal with it, not in the way that you've done it before. So you go into the meeting and something happens, same thing, Hara, and you do it. You behave in the same way, or you're doing well, and then something else happens. The person says something else, and you fall into the same trap. That's okay. Maybe you have to then go back out. What happened? And you analyze it so that you understand what that mental model is again. The next time, think about you going into this meeting. This is what's happened that time. Second time, right? I'm going to do something different this time. I'm going to try and understand, because this causes me to feel this way. Well, I don't want to feel that way. I'm going to want to feel a better way. How can I, if I want to feel happy, pleased, what is it that I need to say, do myself? Maybe it's I've got to listen to this person. Maybe I've got to demonstrate some understanding with empathy. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Well, let's see if we can work out whatever it is together. However you decide to deal. We couldn't go into all of that in this 1 hour. But that's a great question, and it's understanding the triggers, analyzing, get ready for next time. If it happens again, repeat until you maybe develop a different way. It's like going into the gym. You don't get fit overnight. You have to practice. Okay, thank you, Hara, for that question. Yes, any more questions? Anybody else? I hope this has given you some feel for at least an awareness, actually, of some of the steps that you can take just to try and deal with it in the best way you can. Stop, think, what am I feeling? Is this a pattern? What can I do about it? I need to go around those typical emotions that I display typically. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thanks to TDRA again. We're winding up now. So once again, my thanks. Bye to you all. Bye.